If you'll turn in your Bibles to the book of Exodus, chapter 2, that's where we're going to be at this morning. The title of this message is Way to Go Momma Jo, and you'll see why in a second. But being a mom isn't easy. In a recent survey, when asked, moms described motherhood this way. They said, motherhood is where coffee is a lifeline and me time is hiding in the bathroom with a chocolate bar. And sometimes that's how it goes. Another mom said this, motherhood is where every day is a circus and you're the ringmaster trying to keep all the clowns in line. And of course, one said facetiously, I just love cleaning up messes I didn't make. So I became a mom. Amen? Today we really say thank you to moms, in one sense, for putting up with a spoiled, ungrateful, sometimes moody person like my brother. We have a way with mom, and she is so gracious and so many times. If you go to salary.com, it'll show you the actual value of a mom. If you took a mom and all her duties, and you look at what she did from house cleaning to the laundry operator to taxi driver to whatever it is, you put all those things and they have this, you can go there and they have this little chart. You can put in like, oh, I've got one preschooler and I've got one kid in under 18 all the way through high school, and I'm a stay-at-home mom and I'm working 106.4 hours a week. Her value, if you were to put it on in money, is $221,000 a year. So you can just nudge your husband and say, I need a raise. You know, it's seriously valued mom. But before us today is a mom that, in one sense, got the government to help pay for her raising her own kid. And that's quite a good move. But as we look at this, her name is Jochebed. Her name means Jehovah is glorified. And she's a woman who lives up to her name. We note her example. We note her faith. And we note that one woman can have an incredible impact upon the whole world. She changed, in a sense, the world by her faithfulness to God. And before we investigate this woman, Jochebed, let's understand her world first. In chapter 1, just in a brief way, let me run through it. The children of Israel came down from Egypt, or came into Egypt, where Joseph, their brother, was the commander under Pharaoh. It was a time of protection, a time of provision and promise. It was a great time for the Hebrews, for the Israelites. And there they multiplied in number. Verse 7 tells us in chapter 1, they were filled, they grew exceedingly mighty there. But change was sure to happen. First, there was a change of administration. Joseph in that generation died off, and a new king arose in verse 8 who did not know things, in a sense, did not know Joseph. And out of fear for the growing number of the Hebrews and a threat from the Hittites in the north invading Egypt, Pharaoh ends up putting together this forced labor camp. And the Israelites, the Hebrews at the time, they began to build these cities. They built in verse 11 Pithom and Ramesses, these storehouse cities, and Pharaoh was keeping them all under control, you might say. The more the Hebrews multiplied, the harder the bondage became, verse 13. They served with rigor. So there was a change of administration, but then there was also a change of relation, okay? So that the people, the king then orders the Hebrew midwives who were helping to give birth to children to take all the boys and to throw them into, to kill all the boys. The Hebrew midwives were set to kill upon on birth. And why he did this is because, one, it would control the population of the people. There would be no Hebrew men rising up to lead. And secondly, over time, it would just die out that generations. If you take out one of the sexes, you're not going to survive. And so, but instead of killing all the boys, the Hebrew midwives began to save them out of fear of the Lord and encourage and in faith. And the Lord provided for them, putting them in families, it says in verse 20 and 21 of chapter 1. So now Pharaoh takes it a next step further, and he says, all right, we're going to command not just the midwives, but everybody, to get the boys and throw them into the Nile River to destroy them. It went from a small thing to now a national persecution. And so these are the days that Jochebed is in. This is the times that this family is. This is not happy days. This is hard times. And I just can't imagine being in a culture, being in an environment where something like that is actually taking place. Can you imagine for a moment, moms, dads, that reality? Hey, if you have a boy, you are required to kill them because it's the national law in this land. Wow. What happened in their hearts when they found out they were pregnant? Whew. How are we going to do this? So let's read chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. And it says there, "And a man of the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.' Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?' And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Go.' So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages.' So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, 'Because I drew him out of the water.'" And what stands out about this woman of the year, you might say? What stands out about this mom? Well, first thing I would note is her walk. She's a mother of faith in fearful circumstances. There we see in verse 1 and 2, that in Exodus chapter 6, verse 20, the man's name was Amram, and he married his aunt, her name being Jochebed. And there she conceived and bore a son, and yet Moses was not their firstborn son. When you compare it with the rest of Scripture, firstborn was Miriam, the oldest girl. She was about 5 years old at this time. And then there was Aaron. Exodus 7:7 tells us he was 3 years older than Moses. So Moses is not the firstborn. Moses is the lastborn. And yet at the same time we think, well, how come Aaron wasn't thrown into the Nile River? Well, what happened? It's possible that the edict came about while she was pregnant with Moses or after Aaron was born, between those 3 years. And so that would make sense. But nevertheless, when Moses was born, something struck Jochebed's heart about him, and it says there that she saw that he was a beautiful child. Now, every mom thinks their kid is beautiful, right? But as I've said many times, this one was beautiful. My dad joke for the day. The Amplified says that he was exceedingly beautiful. Hebrews 11:23 says that he was a handsome child, a cheerful, happy baby. He would be the baby making the Gerber baby contest of Egypt type of thing. He would be the poster child for Babies R Us in Egypt. All those things that you would think, oh, this is the model kid, and here he is. But something struck within her heart special about this kid. In fact, Jewish legend said this, that Moses' birth was painless for his mother. He was born, and the room was filled with light, brighter than the moon and sun combined. After the first day, he walked and talked and refused milk, eating only solid foods. And probably, if you believe that, he probably opened his bathtub too. Traditions, fables. But Jochebed sensed from the Lord there's something special about this child. And there in verse 2, she hid him 3 months. Hebrews 11:23 says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. So knowing full scope of what's taking place, what God was, not even knowing what God was allowing in her life, in their lives, she trusts the Lord. She sensed from the Lord something, and it was against the ways that were out there, but she said, Lord, I'm going to trust you with this, and I'm going to go forward. And we say, way to go, Mama Jo, because that's a good thing to walk by faith. You see there in your life that God doesn't give you the full picture. He doesn't give you the full picture that faith isn't exercised. He gives you enough of it to exercise your faith, but He doesn't give you the full picture because He wants you trusting in Him. There's a portion of your heart that's got to say, God, I'm going to trust you, not knowing the outcomes here. Day by day as you're walking with the Lord. And maybe this morning, Mom, you're in a place where you're having to trust God with certain outcomes. Oh, maybe it's a health issue, or maybe it's a family issue. Maybe it's with your kids, and you said, God, you know what? I sense from you this, and so now I'm trusting you in that. Help me, Lord. Walk by faith. Trust His leading. It could be that God has called you for such a time as this. Not knowing the outcome of what's next, you have to trust the Lord. And as you honor Him, you'll find that God will honor you. So Jochebed is a mother of faith in fearful circumstances. Fearing the Lord more than the king, more than the world's pressures around her, she chose to do this. The second thing that we might note about her is her wisdom. Her walk is great, and her wisdom, she's a mother of wisdom in troublesome waters. Note her wise steps, verse 3 and 4. When she could no longer hide him. That's her first wise step. She recognized her inabilities. And that is wisdom. We're not told exactly why or what the circumstances involve, but somewhere at this point, after 3 months, she says, we can't do this. We can't do this anymore. And she recognized her inabilities in the depth of her faith. She didn't press the situation. She sensed from the Lord something. She didn't just push it and said, oh, we'll be fine. Let's just keep going. God will take care of it. There was some impression upon her heart where she would say, I just can't do this anymore. We recognize that moms are super, but no one is a super mom. And there comes a point of where, a time when she can't do, nor should she do what she had done before. And maybe you're at that place with your own mom. How do I navigate this course? Mom has always done these things, and now I'm realizing that she needs to stop. And I don't know how to tell her that. I don't know what to do about it. You see, 3 months earlier, God was saying, go for it. In your heart, you need to hide him away. You need to do this. But now He's saying, now it's time to let go. And giving that impression upon her own heart of what she needs to do. And for us to know that love does know its limitations. It listens to wise counsel, and it's willing to make hard choices for what's best for others too. When your mom says to you, hey kids, I can't do it anymore. I can't do that thing anymore. It's the opportunity for you and her to trust God's timing in the next season of life. It's okay. The Lord is still in control. Because, Mom, your inabilities are just as vital as your abilities. It's God's way of saying we walk by faith, not by sight. If your tendency is always to do and always to control, and you get to that point where you can't do, guess what God's saying? You've got to trust me, that I'm still the God who does. And you can't do it all. So she recognizes her inabilities. Secondly, she resorted to do all she could to protect her child. It says there in verse 3, that when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch. So she is doing something, and she put the child in it. And being a woman of the Word, she would have known that God saves from judgment. She would have known the story, really, of Noah, because she's following that same pattern. She did just as Noah did. She built an ark, which, by the way, this is the only time outside of Noah's ark that the word is used in the Bible. She did the exact same thing. Her ark was made of bulrushes, which were papyrus reeds there on the banks of the Nile River. They were used to make small boats and different things like that. And then she pitched it, which means that she made it waterproof. She glued it all together. She probably checked and double-checked every little nook and cranny as she thinks, okay, I'm going to put my baby in here. He can't swim. Well, let's make sure this thing floats. Let's take the dog first, She's doing all these things to make sure that it's going to be safe and right. And then she takes this Redeemer, we might say, Moses, and she puts him inside of it and laid it on the waters of judgment, the Nile River. And it was exactly the picture of what God did with Noah, a redeemer of humanity in an ark on the waters of judgment. But here, Jochebed is protecting her child as best as she could in a difficult world. She's not resorting to fleshly reasoning. That's not what this is. She's not fearfully panicking. It's not happening. She's not being overbearing as a parent. What is she doing? She is walking by faith. She's planning according to what God has revealed before and said, God, if you saved before, I believe you can save now. And I'll take my child one step at a time, doing the next most important thing, and she puts him in the basket. Wise woman, for sure. The third wise step she has is that she relied on God to direct her path. It says when she put the child in it, verse 3, then she laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And at this point, she is wisely letting go and trusting her baby into the hands of the Lord. She is wisely saying, God, you have to take it from here. There's an old story back in 2005 when a particular woman in New York, her name was Trecinda Fox, was in an apartment building and fire engulfed the building. And she had a 1-month-old baby at the time. And she made a painful choice. There were people down below and she was upstairs. And she took her 1-month-old baby and dropped him out the window into the arms of people down below. The person who happened to catch her was actually a catcher on the local baseball team. And he caught her, saved the child. The fire department came and rescued her and brought her down. And they asked her that question about that painful decision to let go. What went through your mind? And she said this. She said, I prayed that someone would catch him and save his life. I said, God, please save my son. Jochebed had to do a similar thing. Lord, I'm leaving him in your hands. Please save him somehow, some way. And she put him there in the reeds, by the reeds that would act as a buffer against predators and maybe keep that basket from the currents going on, and yet it could be easily found. Ultimately, God was in control and had to direct her steps. And so, Mom, I would tell you this, or I would ask you this: are you relying on God to direct your steps with your kids? There's certain things that you just have to go, God, I've got to give my kids into your hands and say, you take them from here. It's a tough thing. It's a difficult thing, but it's an act of faith. You're releasing them into God's hands, and now you step back and you have to let God work as only He can. But there's one more step, a very wise step she did, and that is it found in verse 4. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. She's responsible to know the outcome. She let it go, you might say, but she didn't leave it alone. This is the first helicopter parenting, in a good way is what's happening. Her hands are off of it, but she's working behind the scenes. She's staying informed, and it's love that's seeing things through the end. And here's what you find, is siblings make great spies, don't they? They make great tattletales, but they make great spies. And I can just see Jochebed going, okay, Miriam, remember she's 5 years old. Miriam, here's what I want you to do. You're going to go down, you're going to take your Barbie walkie-talkie and your binoculars, and you're going to go down to the river and go hide out and be my eyes and tell me what's going on. Okay, Mommy, you got the walkie-talkie. Hey, Mama Jo, this is big sis. Oh, butterfly. Hey, no, I need you focused. I need you to stay focused. Tell me what's going on. And all that happens in our minds. This is a 5-year-old. And so when we get to the next part, we begin to see this is not what a 5-year-old came up with. This was the plan that God had put in Mama Jo's heart to share. And she placed him there in the river. Miriam is there as a spy. And we look at it and go, you know what? What a great, wise woman. A woman of faith, a woman of wisdom that knows her inabilities. She resorts to doing all she can practically by faith. She's relying on God to direct her steps, and she's responsible, taking it one step at a time to know the outcomes of what's happening. But number 3, we begin to see her willingness in verse 5 through 9, because there was something, 5 through 10, there's something here. Verse 5, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And while the Nile was a tool of judgment for Pharaoh in this time, throw your babies there to die, it was also one of the gods of Egypt. You remember? First plague was against the Nile River, turning it into blood. And so when she's down there, this is probably a ritual of some sort, but the Nile was considered a life provider. And so as Pharaoh's daughter is there bathing, her maidens would have been along the shores to keep an eye out. We want to make sure she's safe. We want to make sure that no one was hiding out. They're protecting her privacy. And it's possible that Jochebed, knowing that the Pharaoh's daughter would come down here, that she said, this is where I'm going to hide. This is where I'm going to put him. It's planned out. But still, she has to be sensible. Still, she is thinking, God, you have to take it. Because she could come and take a bath and she could be gone, and now what? There's still little pieces that had to come together. But as God would have it, the princess spotted this little box out of curiosity, sends her security team over there, and they get it and take it to her in verse 6. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. It was as if God kept this kid quiet, and then when she opened the lid, he pinched him, Get him crying. Let's get those heartstrings, Mama. Let's get them that interest of what's going on to see this. And she knew the edict. She wasn't oblivious to it. She knew what was the law of the land, and that babies were supposed to be thrown into this river to be sacrificed. And yet the cry seemed to pierce her heart in such a way. His helplessness and her abilities and God's move here, and as God would have it, she began to have compassion, and piece by piece this is coming together. Verse 7. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? And that's what I'm saying. 5-year-olds don't come up with this, right? You got to get candy? That's about where they're at, And so this was almost like Mother Jo said, okay, here's what you need to say, Miriam. Say this clearly, say it particularly, say this, because this is important. As Miriam pops out of the bushes, I'm sure the Pharaoh's daughter said, well, where did you come from? And she says these words, and as you pick apart these words, here's what we see. 4 things Miriam said in sense of winning favor. Number 1, there was a supplication. She said, shall I go? Which means that she asked. She didn't demand. She asked. I'm at your service, ready and willing. And I'll tell you what, when faced with a predicament, a leader is looking for someone who will offer help, not just tell them what they need to do. And so she came with supplication. Number 2, she offered a solution, a practical solution. She didn't say, oh, bummer to be in your shoes. Good luck. See ya. I'm playing with frogs. No, she presented this, shall I go call a nurse for you? And I think that's specific there. Someone skilled and ready to attend and nurse this baby. And a wet nurse was common in that day for the Hebrew children in that regards as well. This is all coming from Mama Jo. It's her plan God gave her. Number 3, there's direction. The solution had detailed direction. It was thought through. She says there, from the Hebrew women. Shall I go and call a nurse from the Hebrew women? Not just any woman that you would know, but one in particular who would know the customs and culture of the Hebrew. This is a Hebrew child. Let's make sure we connect that. And she's probably thinking, in one sense, I have the perfect person for you too. And then the 4th one is that intention. That intention. The direction had an intended goal that she may nurse the child for you. She wasn't looking to take the child away. She was looking to help and serve the princess in this manner. And I like these 4 things because they remind us of this reality. When you are faced with a situation, again, what did she do? Her supplication offered a solution with a clear direction and pure intention. That may be a mouthful, but what it means is this. When you are faced with a situation and you're thinking about how do I win the favor? How do I win the favor from this reluctant person? It is not going to happen by force or fear when you say, I'm the mom, that's why. It's not going to happen when you say, you better or else. There's a different approach. It's godly wisdom that works. It's the approach that says, I'm going to bend the heart in love and I'm going to serve and win the witness that matters most of all. The witness. And so take note from her heart what happened. Because even with everything in place, even with the Miriam, here's what you need to say, even with all these things planned out, she still could have heard from that princess, get out of here, kid, you bother me. I'll figure it out myself. And this story would be a completely different thing. God was working in this. Jochebed was trusting God. She was doing her part, yes, but she was trusting God in the process as well. And the princess, verse 8, said to her, go, and the maiden went and called the child's mother. Imagine the joy Jochebed had when everything worked out. And here she is. She gets to have Moses back in her arms. But with that came two things, blessings and burdens. Verse 9 gives you the blessing. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. The blessings are threefold here. First, there is an overflow in the heart. Her willingness, listen, her willingness and her sacrifice of faith was rewarded in full measure. She has the baby. She hides him for 3 months. She, by faith, puts him into the basket, not knowing what would happen, and the 3 months turned into 3 years. What a great thing to remember, that God honors faith. Hebrews 11:6, He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Oh, it may not be financially, as she was paid to take care of her own child, but God has a way of rewarding faith as we walk by faith. Even so, many times it's exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or think. Number 2, she had the opportunity to lay the foundation of faith in the life of Moses. For the next 3 years, she can pour into Moses all the biblical training, all the things necessary in laying that foundation, all the needed love, as those first years are so formidable. She's doing that. Every day is intentional. Every day is biblical. Every day is pouring into that. And number 3, she had an open door without fear. She no longer had to worry about, man, are they going to come and kick down the door and pull away my child and throw him in the river? They didn't have to worry about the sheriff in town doing that. She, in a sense, had a free pass. And now her heart could rest and be at peace and enjoy that time. This is what God did because she was walking by faith. Do you see the blessings when you exercise faith? Do you see the overflow that happens in your heart to the Lord? Do you see how your hand at work, doing what you can do, walking wisely, that God says, hey, watch, you do your part, I'm going to do more than you think. And He does. He walks with us through those things, and He works in such a way that we go, man, God has given me an open door. This is the hand of God. I couldn't have asked for this. This is way better. And He was working. But her willingness also came with a burden. The blessings, and then there was the burden in verse 10. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. The burdens. First was her limitations. You recognize that she knew that there will come a day when I've got to turn him back over. There will come a day when now we'll have to let Mo go, in a sense. And that's what a difficult thing. Incredibly blessed to have those years with him, but this must have been a truly hard time. After 3 years, she comes to Pharaoh's daughter. She brought him, and he became her son. What I like is that she brought him. She could have ran away. This is my kid, ain't yours. I'm out of here. She could have said, you know what, take a DNA test, 23andMe, Egyptian style. We're going to prove whose kid this really is. It's mine. But by faith, she initiated this, and she brought her son and gave him into the arms of another woman. What a tough choice. Willingly. I'm sure there's tears. The heart is attached. Because Mama Jo is all that Mo ever know. Right? At this point. Sorry. But there's that reality, and now he starts over with a strange lady. I mean, he's only 3 years old, but at the same time, you do remember that. Let me just say this. Those of you that know people who are foster parents, or maybe you are a foster parent, such a high and holy calling, such a treasure that you're willing to love little ones just for a season, knowing that they'll also leave you. It's a lot easier, I'll tell you, to adopt than it is to foster. I just can't imagine, and speaking of Jack, my son here, but we adopted him from South Korea, and he was in a foster home itself, and this couple took care of him, and it was 2008 when I was going to China. I had a chance to stop in Korea and meet his foster mom, and I showed her videos and pictures, and they had given us a whole bunch of different supplies and stuff, and when she saw him, she just starts crying. And I said, "Do you remember this little guy?" And she says, "Oh yeah, who can forget Jack?" And so I just told her, I said, "Thank you so much for caring for him." She had him for six months. Thank you so much for caring for him. And come to find out her story that her and her husband had fostered over 40 kids at the time. Just loving them. And so if you are in that arena or called to that arena, God bless you and thank you for loving children. The simplest, the purest form of love in a sense. So it's a good thing. So anyways, she knew her limitations, but number two, she knew this burden of his identification. She brought Moses to Pharaoh's daughter, and it says there, he became her son. A new identity, a new surrounding, a whole new name. Moses means drawn out, as it says there, or Drew. Your name Drew? Anybody here Drew? You got a Mo name. So anyways, Moses would be raised here in royalty. He's learning all the sciences and philosophy, everything that the world could have for him. And he was involved in military strategies, according to some of the historians at the time. Josephus, a Jewish historian, said Moses was heir to the throne of Egypt, and that while a young man, Moses led the armies of Egypt in victorious battle against the Ethiopians. In other words, everything at his beck and call, when it comes from the world, was available to Moses. And Jochebed, in a sense, standing on the sideline, would watch as the world tried to remake Moses. Tried to make him into something. Forget your beginnings. Forget your God. You are a prince of Egypt. And everything is at your disposal. But she knew, I think she knew in her heart, that inward work of those few years would stick. It would stick. It wasn't for nothing. And mom, when you give your kids God's word and His truth, you can be sure of that it will not return void. But it's been years. Though the seeds are planted, the seeds are growing. You just can't see what's happening. And the fruit will come about as God sees it. And your kids may be in a place where they're just worldly. And you've spent many nights in tears and many prayers going, when, God, are you going to turn them? I gave them your word when they were a little kid, and they're just so squirrely and all over the place. Hey, have a little heart. Take courage from Jochebed. When we look at the story of Moses, she had 3 years. And she probably prayed for the next 37 years before Moses was finally broken at age 40. To say, I want to identify with these people, the Hebrews. Of course, he took things into his own hands, right? Took things in his own hands, murdered somebody, and then fled for another 40 years. You see, from the point of that foundation, it shows you the importance 3 years can make in pouring into your kids, even if such a small amount of time, because it was 37, or you might say when he was 80, he finally answered that call to do the work of ministry. 77 years later, she's gone off the scene. She probably prayed all the way through until her last breath. Take those seeds, Lord, that were planted and bring them to fruition. Watch over my kid. Let him be walking with you. I don't know if she was around when he finally said, I'm going to identify with the Israelites or not. But you think that you have it tough. It's been years. Has it been 37 years? Has it been 40 years? Has it been 77 years? Wow, Lord, make us like Jochebed. To say, I want to be a mother of faith, a mother of wisdom, a mother of willingness to be blessed and to be burdened. Whatever you see fit, Lord, that you would be glorified in my life. And keep praying for those kids. If they're still living, then you keep praying. Let's pray.